Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Cradle Book 12, Waybound, chapters 23 and 24. In these chapters, well, against all odds, Lindon manages to convince Northstrider to ascend. And I really am so glad. I really liked this ending for Northstrider's character. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Andy is here in the chat joining us, as are a bunch of other people. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you all. As usual, I'm going to give the disclaimer that my dog Sam is in the room with me. He is at the moment very busy with a bully stick that he is slowly but surely working his way through at a shocking rate. But I hope he will just be chill. That's not really like him, but I'm hoping. So these two chapters, you guys, I keep feeling like I'm being pranked. Like, what keeps happening is that I reach the end of a chapter that ends on a real cliffhanger moment, and I get very angry at Andy for doing this to me. And then I have to back up and realize I'm the one who did the chapter breakdown for this book, and then just redirect all of that at myself. And here goes another, like, the section 2 chapters ago ended with, like, Lindon falling out of the sky. You know, everything just keeps on being very high stakes. And I, at least at the end of the last episode of recording, read the first few sentences of this chapter to give myself a little bit of a break. But it's very Jake, me sowing, hell yeah, this rules, me reaping, what the shit. Exactly. So we start off, as I had read in the last section, with Lindon getting ready to fight Northstrider if necessary, and finding that Northstrider isn't interested in a fight. That's not the energy that he is bringing. But y'all, I somehow, even while reading this to you guys, didn't clock the fact, despite knowing that Lindon reached through the way and, like, through a portal and grabbed Northstrider and pulled him through, I didn't realize that Lindon had Northstrider by the throat. I knew he grabbed him, and I can't tell you why. I just assumed he, like, grabbed him by the forearm or something, which, like, doesn't really make sense, because you want to grab him in such a way that you know he's not going to make a move because he's too afraid, and his arm is not really going to do the job, although Lindon can consume from any contact, so I suppose anything is as threatening as any other thing with him. But when there's, like, a couple sentences in, he held Northstrider by the throat but released him, I didn't even catch that, you guys, until my third read through. I read this section 3 times. And when I realized the third time, I had to take a second, because this was already, like, such an incredible power move on its own. Even if he had grabbed him by the forearm, I would still have been like, wow. But when I recontextualized everything to him grabbing him by the throat and pulling him through a portal, I just got a boner. That's what happened. It just happened. I had no control over it, and I started to really judge myself because, you know, there's just been some things Lindon has done in this book that have really, you know, I'm just saying. So, anyway, Northstrider, for his part, is feeling very smug and like, ha, I outwitted you. And we find out that even though Lindon does the whole, like, he thinks for a second that maybe Northstrider had been overthinking things. Despite thinking that to himself, it turns out he was mainly getting in contact to try and rescue Emrys. So Northstrider isn't actually that far off track. Like, I was sort of looking at this like he was totally wrong, and Lindon had a completely different objective, and that Lindon was kind of laughing up his sleeve. But no, what's going on in this scene is that Lindon sure has the power to do what needs doing to Northstrider if he does not cooperate. But Lindon's hunger arm is giving him a lot of problems. And this is just going to get worse and worse. Like, by the time they kill the next Dread God, this thing is going to have almost taken him over entirely. And I don't know what that looks like. Because in this confrontation, he is 50% of his attention is divided on just managing the arm and keeping it from jumping up and devouring. If he's at 50% here, I have to assume next Dread God, that's 75% of his attention. And that is way too much to be committing to just ensuring that your own body doesn't fly completely out of your control. I don't like this at all. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, so I'm going to back up, but that's just very, very concerning. So what we get, this is so great. I love this. Like, there's so many parts of this that really, really got me in a very soft spot in terms of what I wish could happen in the world. What we get here is not that Lindon is planning to just straight up berate and threaten Northstrider into ascending. He has Northstrider's echo, and he wants Northstrider to engage with it and look at some of his own memories. This is fascinating. So he says, I thought maybe you should talk to yourself. You're still here? The sage asked himself scornfully. Psychological tricks are not the tool to use against me, the real Northstrider said. You think this is a trick? Lindon asked curiously. He wondered if the monarch really thought so. I'm sure you can sense this is really you. It's a trick nonetheless. My younger self cannot persuade me to ascend. Pathetic, the hunger echo said. And the sage says, I'll tell you what I told Lindon then. I intended to gather power until I could force the Abaddon to remove the Dread Gods. If this world is their responsibility, they should clean it up. What happened to me that I would become the one who turns his face from his responsibilities? And we have Northstrider's face shut down, and Lindon can see that he has decided he's just going to dig his heels in. He's not going to let himself be convinced. I really appreciate it being described this way because I have had people in my life like this, as I'm sure many of us have. My father was the kind of person who would just decide the stance he was going to take on something, and whether or not that was like logically the sound place to be, he refused to at all consider new evidence or anything brought to his attention that flew in the face of what he had already decided he was going to believe or do. And you could watch it happen. He was very transparent, which is kind of funny because he thought he was somebody who really controlled his emotions well. And he was, unless you knew him. And if you knew him, you could tell so easily because he was honestly pretty predictable. And that is what we're dealing with Northstrider, is somebody who's like really, really strong, but also extremely stubborn. And later on, after things go down, what Dross tells Lindon is that he's going to find a way to rationalize why staying here is still okay. He's done it many times before. And that's the toughest kind of person to deal with. Somebody who can find a way to intellectualize their motives instead of really looking at them honestly and being straightforward. They can take things and twist them. There's a really limited amount that you can do with somebody who isn't willing to be completely honest with themselves. And it's sort of interesting to me how much being a monarch requires self-awareness and coming to insights about your motivations and what it is that you want and what path you're going to follow. And yet you can still lie to yourself like this, So anyway, let's see. I'm trying to find the spot here. Yeah, here it is. So Lindon says, you don't have to listen to me. Listen to yourself. And Northstrider says, well, why should I? And Lindon's like, because I'm giving you the chance to do this in a voluntary manner, which I don't have to do. And I don't. So maybe you should just kind of be low-key grateful that I'm allowing this instead of beating the ever-loving shit out of you. And we know Lindon is very concerned about his arm and consuming Northstrider might do some shit to him. So he doesn't even want to do that. But it's not like it's a threat that doesn't have truth to it. So finally, Northstrider says it's not going to prove anything. And Lindon's like, it may though. And if it doesn't, we'll do things the other way. And he tries to make Lindon swear that he won't attack while Northstrider's guard is down. And Lindon won't swear it. And we have another moment of Northstrider kind of having to just cope with the fact that he could demand all he wants of Lindon, and there is absolutely no reason that Lindon should give him even the slightest bit of ground, because he is so outmatched here. And that is very, very embarrassing. So he starts to reach forward to his echo, and Lindon slaps his hand away, and he's like, what the fuck? And Lindon says, that was not the technique that we agreed on, bud. How about that? And I just love this. Even in the end, when he's acting like he's capitulating, he is still trying to erase this memory. It makes me feel like he knows that this will convince him. I don't feel like he would put up this sort of resistance if he weren't aware it was probably going to affect him. Do you know what I'm saying? So then something very interesting happens. He goes through with the correct technique, and Dross decides that he's going to do a simulation of what he's seeing and just does an impression of him. So what Will White decided was, I'm not going to have you guys see the memories that Northstrider sees. And I think that's a very interesting choice. I would love to talk to him about why that is. Because I don't know about y'all, but I fully, once he decided that he was going to do it, expected that I was going to be seeing the memories alongside him. I just assumed, because Will White likes to use the tool of seeing other people's memories and seeing things from their perspective as a sort of storytelling shortcut. I'm sorry, guys. I have something in my eye. For those who are watching me on camera, you're probably like, what the fuck is she doing? But I think there's an eyelash or something. And the fact that he decided not to do that and to just have this little kind of bit with Dross, what I am sort of thinking is Will was sort of wondering first of all, what are we expecting? What's something that's very predictable? That we'll see the memories. Maybe just subvert that for the sake of doing something unexpected and having a little bit of comedy instead. And secondly, that maybe what Northstrider sees is so quick and so high impact that writing something that would be convincing in terms of his whole mindset being shaken up would be, it would require so much time in the story that he didn't want to undercut the pacing of what he's doing, because this book has been all out almost all the time. There have been very few like moments where we can catch our breath. And unless he really went deep with these memories, I don't think it would be entirely satisfying to us. So you have the choice of like going really hard with it, or just not doing it and letting us imagine what it is that he saw. And while I really do think I would have enjoyed reading about it, I can understand at the length this book already was, thinking, you know what, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Will wrote this scene and then on reread or editing went through and was sort of like, I don't know, man. I don't know that we need this whole thing here, you know? I really would like to ask him about it. So yeah, I'm not like, I don't dislike this choice. In fact, a part of me kind of prefers it because I can fill in the blanks with something of my own that isn't explicitly like provable or something that I could really disagree with. And I also do like the fact that it's just unexpected, you know? So Northstrider comes out of this and looks lost, and Lindon summons a chair for him, and he just falls into it. He leaned forward and put his head in his hands. If you wanted to shame me before sending me off in defeat, you've succeeded. Do what you will. I don't want to send you off in defeat. I want to send you off in victory. You won a long time ago. And I really, really enjoy thinking through what it could have been that Northstrider saw. And this is something I wish we could do for a lot of people. There are so many folks out there that completely lose touch with what their goals originally were by the time they reach success. And they forget the people that helped them and everything that, like, all of the struggles they went through, the fact that other people also go through those same struggles and maybe they can help them. It's really, you guys know, my issue with billionaires is the same as many people's, where it's just like, I genuinely don't know how you can get to a point where you have that kind of money and you don't just start giving it away. I would start giving my money away at a much like lower level than even $1 million. Never mind $1 billion. I could give away millions if I were a billionaire, and I wouldn't even fucking feel it. It would be nothing. If I got 20 grand tomorrow, I would likely give at least 5 grand away. I just would, because I have friends who are in desperate need of help. So the idea to me of like getting to a point of success where I am like beyond my wildest dreams, and I have completely forgotten the kind of help that I could be giving if I was focused enough on that, because I'm so caught up in other more petty goals by the time I get to that place. Having somebody come and bring me back down to earth and be like, do you remember these several people that you promised to help who have watched you like get to these heights of fame or success, and you haven't done anything that you promised multiple times you would do for them? I think that I would appreciate it. And I really wonder how many folks out there who have got to a place where they could help and have lost track of what's important, this kind of thing could like slap back into consciousness and make them go, oh, wow, right, I really lost track there. I should have been doing a lot of different things from a while ago. And what we get down to, and this fascinated me, because he asked for more time, and Lindon's like, you can have more time if you agree to fight with us and ascend as soon as I tell you. And he like is looking for the loopholes, but then is just like, all right, fine, I'll just do it now. I'll give you instructions about who to take care of. And we find out that what it is that it is just as simple as he was afraid to ascend. He was afraid to ascend. That is it. That's all it is. And I gotta tell you, I thought there was going to be more to it than that. And I kind of like that there isn't. Because a simple fear can be genuinely all that it takes to completely rob you of your direction. And it doesn't even have to be a fear that's very like, I was going to say specific or concrete. And I'm realizing it's actually much more dangerous to have a fear that isn't specific or concrete. Because if it's a vague thing, almost anything can be contextualized to make you think it's leading in that direction. And so you get completely stymied because your fear isn't specific enough that it's easy to tell, oh, this wouldn't do that though. Everything would sort of be like vague and foggy and make you go, but what if, So the fact that he's just straight up, like his whole plan was to ascend, and then he gets to this point where he could, and he just doesn't want to take that next step. Honestly, I fucking get it. I really get it. Like, it's such a simple fear. It's such a basic fear that it would be really tempting to try and be like, well, a monarch would need something a lot more complex to hold them back. But they're just people still. And I really buy it, because you guys know I was sort of confused when I found out what the deal was with the monarchs and the dread gods by the fact that Northstrider had stayed when we had been in his head when he fought that dragon, and we saw how sort of possessive he was of the world. And not in terms of like power, but he felt very protective of it. And he was like, how dare you on my fucking turf hurt all these people? And it seemed like he was the exact type of person who would be totally disgusted by what the monarchs are doing. And I was really confused about how he had turned a corner from that to being a person who stayed. And seeing this, I'm genuinely like, this just makes sense. It just does. So, Emic Shard says, I relate. I will barely make rent some months because I have just enough money to help a friend out of a tough spot. I don't see an ethical reason to have that much money. That's exactly it. I've talked about billionaires on Cradle before. And I got a comment from somebody who was just like, they earned that money. No, they didn't. Let's just be crystal clear. There is no ethical way that you make that kind of money. There isn't. You're not working for it. The only way to make billions is by exploiting other people. That is it. Bottom line. There is no way around that. And that can come in all kinds of forms, whether that be exploiting actual workers because you own a business, whether it be exploiting people who don't have a voice by having lobbyists who write laws to get your business like tax breaks, whatever it is. There is absolutely no way to hoard that much wealth and not have done something fucked up and wrong to get it. End of story. You can come at me with any story you want, and I guarantee you research any portion of that and you will find all kinds of skeletons in that closet. That is the way it works. Everybody who makes money above a certain threshold is a bad person, and I straight up believe that. There is no doubt in my mind. And there have been so many points, even with my little tiny nothing business, that I could have made much more sketchy decisions and made money off of it. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt wrong. And I think all the time about how if I had just had a little bit less of a conscience here and there, I'd probably be making a lot more money. But I couldn't bring myself to do it because I want to like hold myself to a certain standard. And some people genuinely just don't care about that sort of thing. They just don't. And that's, in my opinion, what's wrong with everything. If I could like have one wish to make the world a better place, it's to bring empathy to all the people who lack it. Because I really feel the people who don't have it, if they suddenly did, that would literally change everything. That's all it would take. But it's shocking how lacking in it the world can be. Min says, oh my God, you are a secret commie. Not secret. Very much like, pretty much, it's on my Facebook profile, like, basically. But yeah, I just, you know, guys, there just really is a point. How much do you need? And how are you okay with what you've had to do? You know, I took down my Harry Potter feed finally because I just felt so gross continuing to like gain listeners and stuff, knowing that I'm recorded on there lauding J.K. Rowling, who has turned out to be this like garbage transphobe. And I took it down. Y'all know, like, that feed coming off of Spreaker, that's lost me like $300 a month in advertising that I was making. And that's a lot for me. Like, that's affected me. It's been tough. And I thought the other day, like, I could just put it back up and I'd get that money back. I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's just like, you know? So anyway, that's where I'm at. And I am loving this whole scene because Northstrider getting reminded, this is allegedly why you did everything. And you're just trying to act like, no, it's not. But it is. And you know it is. And you can fool yourself if you're given enough time. But what if I don't let you have that time? And you just have to face it. It's great. Very gratifying. So, we go to Lindon rescuing Emrys. And he's like, hey, I'm sorry it took so long. To which she's like, I waited like an hour. I really thought it would be longer. So, it's fine. And when she realizes that he convinced Northstrider to ascend, but didn't like consume any of his power, she's a little bit like, oh, probably we could have used that power, but okay, fine. And he asks how she was caught, and he said him and Rhaegon Shen did it together. And I saw how things were going to go, so I just figured I'd let them catch me, and we'd, you know, get to this point eventually. So at this point, she suddenly gets distracted, and she turns and sort of looks into the middle distance and is like, oh, this is what Rhaegon Shen didn't want me to see. And she grabs Lindon by the face and transmits, using C as a command, what it is she is seeing happening at this very moment. So Rhaegon Shen is going to parley with the Bleeding Phoenix. And he is not prepared for what the Bleeding Phoenix is now. This is so hilarious to me. I love it so much. So he's in this field, and there's a red sun overhead, and a huge shape, a mass of red shaped like an egg. It's like the size of a mountain. The phoenix had formed itself into a much, much smaller body. It even looked like a human woman, a motherly figure with bright red hair and beautiful scarlet wings spread out behind her. The wings didn't look like they were formed from liquid, but from perfectly real feathers. She sat at a table that had been meticulously set up in the middle of a field, set with a white tablecloth and silverware that looked suspiciously as though they had been taken from Rhaegon Shen's own collection. I love that, and I really want to know more about that, but that's not what's important right now. So I just want to address, like, what's so lovely about this is that we're still dealing in hunger. She's still hungry and consuming, It's just way more refined now. She's at a lovely table with silverware and crystal goblets and wine, but a bitch is still constantly eating, though. Like, I just really liked this touch of just, like, we're still going to have that be a thing, but we're going to make it as elegant and classy as we can. And Raygun Shen, for his part, is trying to assume a cavalier sort of attitude. Maybe cavalier is the wrong word. He's attempting to behave as if he's perfectly comfortable. That he's not totally intimidated to the point where he literally would rather run away if he had his choice. And he has this horn made from the binding of Subject 1 and is walking into this knowing he tried to take all of these creatures under his control. And maybe they are going to have a problem with him. So he's being a little cautious here. And when he sees her, she's like, weren't you going to control us? And what he tries to do to offset this accusation is hold up the horn and be like, I could still, but I'm not. And so we should negotiate as if we are on equal footing, because I have this tool at my disposal I'm choosing not to use because I respect you. And it's a real gamble because it's unclear whether or not she could just take it from him. She acts like she could and says she could. He is like, are you sure? And sort of calls her bluff a little bit. She doesn't push the issue. I genuinely can't tell. I think she can't. But it seems like either it's not worth it to her to try, or she's not fully confident herself. And he's even thinking to himself how, like, what he's done with Subject 1's binding is well outside of what the sacred arts have, like, reached in Cradle, and that it's an unknown whether this has worked the way he imagines it should work. There's a theory behind it, and then there's seeing the way it practically shakes out, and it's never been done before, so there's really no way to know for sure. And I just like seeing him quake a little bit here, honestly. So in this whole thing, she's got her glass of wine that she's swirling and is like, isn't it annoying how I'm swirling this wine? I'm doing it to annoy you because it's annoying, and people who do it are annoying, don't you think? And I appreciated that. Just, you know, because she can. So she says, what do you want from me? And he says, you saw the stars disappear. And she flinches. We're on the same team now. If the adopted son of the destroyer succeeds in his goals, he will be rid of us. You will fade into nothing, and all my time in this world will be wasted. Who can match him if not for you? And she takes a little bite of food and considers, and then she says, what do you think? And the boulder beside her vanishes, and Raygun Shen realizes there's a portal there that he did not detect, and that there is a power behind the portal that he didn't feel. Essentially, she is way, way more powerful even than he was thinking she was. The fact that he is so good at being able to, like, feel spatial irregularities, that's how he found the pocket world, right? And that's a gift of his. And she was able to do this with no real effort, it doesn't seem like. And that the power behind the portal was a fucking dread god. And he didn't detect it whatsoever. Terrifying. And it's the fucking Titan who says we don't need him. And Raygun is like, oh, fuck. Like, he just kind of starts to freak out. And the Phoenix is like, you know, he's not wrong. Like, all we need to do while we're still conscious is get some monarchs of our own set up, and we wouldn't even need to deal with you at all. Like, probably could even stay conscious. And Rhaegon is like, Lindon isn't going to let you do that. Like, we can ascend and leave Cradle and we'll be fine. Y'all can't. And therefore, this world can't get by unless he kills you, in his view. He has to kill you. That's his only other option. And she's like, I don't think so, actually. And we cut back to Lindon and Emrys. And he is just like, wow, okay. And she tries to tell him you can't negotiate with them. And when he says, I know, it's like he is in the midst of feeling this overwhelming hunger that's only a portion of what the Dread Gods feel. And it's so close to being out of his control. He's like, yeah, there's no fucking way. Like, no creature that's feeling more hunger than me is going to be able to manage itself. Like, this is just not, it's not going to work. That's the point of them, is that they consume. And she seems very reassured by how conscious he is of his own experience and what that means for what the Dread Gods are. And she's like, it would be nice if the Bleeding Phoenix just killed Shen. I don't see it, though. Like, in the future, I'm not seeing that. It doesn't seem likely. I can handle Shamiara. Malice is the one that I'm really concerned about. And Lindon is like, look, I'm going to have to try and convince her to ascend. And she says, do you think that's going to work, man? Like, come on. And he's like, no, I don't. But Mercy's my friend. I got to give her the opportunity. And she seems to understand that. So we go to Lindon talking with Mercy. And he comes into her book where she is trying to train her willpower by sitting in the midst of darkness and just sort of like pressing back against the overall atmosphere. And let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Here it is. Yeah. So we kind of depart a little bit from the subject at hand. In the middle of the conversation, he's looking around and there are all these different predictions sort of what Mercy could potentially be. And he asks if they're real or illusions. And Dross, after at first saying he doesn't know, he offers the opinion it's a mix. They're possible versions presented and arranged to make you focus on certain options, which I really wanted her to ask a little bit more about that, because that feels like he's saying Malice is going to make you feel like there are endless possibilities and then influence you very strongly to choose the ones that she prefers. But she doesn't really ask him about that. And I don't know if maybe she already knew and just doesn't, because Malice is such a manipulator. Of course, that's how she would set this up. And I just really wanted more of a question in Mercy's head about well, what exactly does that mean, So let's see. I would like both of your opinions on the 7th page, but there's a lot of my mother in it. And they go in. She was face to face with an empress. The Netherworld Empress was clearly based on Akura Malice, or perhaps it was the other way around. She had dark hair, though it didn't flow like living shadow, and her eyes shone like cruel amethyst stars. She wore a crown of silver and elaborate ceremonial robes. With a black bow of darkness in one hand and a spear at her side, she stood over a battlefield. It stretched for miles, and remnants picked through thousands of strewn bodies. Aura of death and destruction choked the air, but the entire space was dominated by the will of the Empress. And Mercy's having a real difficult time, trying to keep eye contact and not let herself be completely cowed by this thing. Meanwhile, Lindon is like, exactly how does this work? How did she do this? And Dross says she just had a really clear image of the perfect version of herself. And she's got all kinds of icons going right now. And let's see. Here it is. She starts looking down at Lindon and has her bow like half drawn. Lindon's body began to flicker. He gazed wide-eyed at his fading self. If we can put this much will into Dread God Madra, we might be able to make a puppet construct that could fight monarchs. Do you think we could leave spirits behind that can prevent people from advancing to monarch? I'll be honest, you guys, it hadn't really struck me that even if they won this battle, other people could just advance to monarch and cause the problem with the dread gods all over again. I don't know why I didn't think of that, but I didn't. I genuinely thought if everybody is aware the dread gods only are created by the presence of monarchs, then nobody will want to do it. Which is fucking insane. That's literally the plot of the book. That there are plenty of people willing to sacrifice that and do not care. It's not a factor. I don't know why. I was just like, well, now that we know better, when the fuck in the history of human civilization have we fucking learned from our mistakes? I mean, genuinely, really, for real. It just, we may have grown more open-minded and progressive about letting people be who they are in certain ways. But in terms of like having seen the consequences of a thing and we just don't make that mistake again, we don't do that. Nobody is like, people just always think, well, it's not going to happen this time. It's not going to be like that this time. We won't let it do, like, oh my God, I don't know why I didn't think of that. And so the idea of leaving something behind that'll just be like, if you try to be a monarch, I will fucking eat you. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. Mercy, meanwhile, the fact that he's like thinking in this direction, it's a little bit of a bummer for her because he's like attempting to help, but she really doesn't appreciate how much help she still needs. And when he tries to say that will help, she says, you didn't need this much help. I've had someone holding my hand since I was a girl. Now, look, I get where she's coming from. Lindon interrupts and says Ethan turned out to be the Reaper of Worlds. And yes, massive advantage there for sure. However, he did get raised in a community that like looked down on him to the point of almost just wishing that he would die. And she was a prodigy naturally right away who got given the best of everything for many years. So I can understand why she would feel like I got more advantages way sooner and I should be further along. However, it is kind of interesting to think about how maybe the very fact that Lindon didn't get those advantages early on is what caused him to push himself so hard. Because every opportunity he got, he felt like he needed to take full advantage of, or it might slip away because he had been denied so many things. And there is this line, and I'm so glad to see that so many people on Kindle highlighted it because I was struck by it as well. I have received more help than anyone in the universe. Even most of my power is stolen. There's nothing noble about doing everything yourself. You just have to do your best to honor the help you've gotten. Yo, there are a lot of people that could stand to hear that line and learn this lesson. There really are. Everybody acts as if it's like such a toxic mindset, and it's a very particularly American mindset. We are so individualist in our society, and we love to tell stories about people who were complete anomalies in their intelligence and their success. When in so many of those stories, there were many, many, many supporting characters that got them where they were. And we just cut them out because we don't respect that kind of like group effort. We only respect the concept of a sole genius who was at the helm and forged ahead despite the odds, despite being told no. And that's not the way those stories almost ever actually played out. People get a lot of help, and for whatever reason, we hate acknowledging that. And we act as if like not being able to make it on your own without help is a personal failing, because we've perpetuated this fake narrative for so long that we've started to fucking buy it. And the idea that like by admitting you accepted help, it somehow diminishes your accomplishments. How much ego do you have to believe that, you know? Like, it's just it's a fascinating thing here. And I really appreciate Lindon saying this to her and the way that they're each coming at the situation. And I also think about like, Lindon is more superpowered than anybody else in his like universe at this point, or his world, Cradle. He also went through some really horrific treatment and trauma that I think motivated him harder than a lot of people would have been. His willpower is very unique, and he is driven, or at least was driven, by a profound self-loathing, which I hesitate to say that is worth it. You know, a lot of us get caught up in the concept of being the best, and we don't really stop to think about how often being the best at something means you put literally everything else in your life away. And it's not just a sacrifice in the grand sense of the word, of you choosing this over all else. In many ways, being super single-minded about pursuing one goal causes you to completely lose sight of all other priorities so that it can warp you. And it's not about voluntarily being this way anymore. It's about how you have like shifted the whole way you look at the world in such a way that you can't get it back. And I don't know that that's like worth it always. With Lindon, it's benefiting a lot of people because he cares about justice and he wants to look out for those who can't defend themselves. And that's like, it's a goal that winds up doing good for the world, but that's like just circumstantial. That's accidental. And I just think it's worth thinking about how we think a lot of the time we could achieve amazing things and still maintain our own sense of self and who we are. But those out there who manage to reach the highest heights, I would bet there's like a disconnect somewhere that they've had to really give up some things that we wouldn't be willing to. And that's okay. Maybe the highest heights are an extreme that we shouldn't shoot for. Maybe that's not natural or good. And I appreciate Lindon's power, but I can't help but think about how much he has had to sideline having any sort of normal life and put it all on the line repeatedly. This is what heroes are for. This is what stories are for. But in the real scheme of life, God, man, like this doesn't feel like a happy life in a lot of ways. So anyway, Lindon is in the middle of telling her, we won't leave you by yourself. And he gets pulled away. And Dross can't find him, and he really begins to panic. He literally grabs Mercy by the collar. Mercy, he cannot get so far that I can't sense him without going through a portal, and he can't do that. Either the labyrinth brought him somewhere without giving him an order, or someone took him. So she's like, all right, let me get out of here and let me sense him. And she does. And she's like, fuck. Okay. Get Yaren and Zeal. We have to go see my mom. And then we cut to Lindon. So he is slammed into this fucking wasteland with the dread gods. The two that are left. And Rhaegon Shen is here looking a little bit shaky. He's trying to be like, haha, I got you. But Lindon's like, yeah, it seems like you're kind of not doing awesome. So I'm just going to set that aside for right now. And I like this moment a whole lot. Lindon has this sudden sense of freedom come over him. Because all the time he is worried about his friends and whether they can keep up and whether they're safe. And he has been drawn into a situation that he didn't choose where they can't join him. And it's suddenly like, I don't have to worry anymore. It's not like, he doesn't care about them, but it's more like, oh, that's not anything that I have to factor into this situation. It's just me versus them. And that's it. And that really does change the whole look of the game for him. So this moment where he's looking at Rhaegon Shen, Rhaegon says, we went through great difficulty to bring you here. If you're not willing to talk, we'll have to turn to a more violent course of action. And he hasn't even quite finished talking, and Lindon attacks him. And he is stopped by... I'm sorry, guys, if you can hear this. This dog is very excitable at the moment. But he is stopped by the Bleeding Phoenix because the binding he has can control her, so he's like not an option to be eaten right now. He can't be touched. She says, Lindon's like, okay, the binding, I get it. And he's thinking about, but that binding tastes good though. I wouldn't mind having a little sneaky snack on that binding. So Shen tries to order the Bleeding Phoenix and the Titan to kill Lindon. You guys, this is so pitiful. Kill him, Shen ordered, but there was no authority behind the word. It seemed he wasn't strong enough to perform a working on two dread gods at once. So rather than a leash, it seemed his control was more like a gentle suggestion. The Phoenix's human form glanced at him, but she smiled at Lindon instead. He's irritating, I know. Why fight him when there's plenty of prey for all of us? So, what she is presenting here as an option that does not involve the death of her and her brother is Lindon throwing in with them, getting rid of the monarchs, and ruling this world themselves, dividing things up so that they each get their own continent, and they basically lean on human beings to feed them voluntarily in exchange for them not killing them and potentially being like guard dogs against things from outside the world. And that's not really like, she doesn't really focus on that because I'm not really sure what that would even look like. But she says something like for protection, And Dross is like, I mean, it technically could work, but it's not going to work. And this is really just the monarchs, but like in a different form, I love Lindon. I don't mean to be rude, but isn't offering tribute to our guardians just a nicer way to say feeding immortal monsters so they don't kill us all? The wandering titan rumbled with anger, which was much more intimidating when it physically shook the ground. In contrast, the Bleeding Phoenix smiled even wider. How is that worse than what the monarchs have already done? If we can expend less energy, just rest and stay conscious, I would say we'd make better rulers than they ever did. I don't disagree, Lindon said. That's why I'm getting rid of you all. Forgiveness, but I was taught to be very thorough when cleaning. which I like to think is a reference to Ethan and the broom icon and the world's best janitor. But this moment is so great, you guys, because it makes a lot of sense to be like, well, I know you hate the monarchs and you're almost one of us now. So how about we just do this together? Fuck the monarchs and we'll still be better than them. And it's like, yeah, you probably would. You'd still be very bad though. Like just trying to replace one system with an almost identical system with different people in the positions that count. Does this sound familiar at all to anybody? Like, genuinely, it's very upsetting. Like, it's just, it bums me out because, yeah, this seems like a thing that has happened so many times. So many times! So, Rhaegon Shen, who tries to say something, just gets blown backward because everybody starts exerting pressure at the same time. And Lindon, Shen is like yelling at him, you should have learned to play the odds. And Lindon looks at him and says, you think I wasn't prepared for this? And then pulls out Wave Dancer. This is wild, guys. Its blade shone gold and white, like the surface of a thunderbolt. It was surrounded by a corona of blue sparks and heralded by a storm. Storm clouds gathered overhead. 4 copies of Wave Dancer spread out to the left, forged from the Weeping Dragon's Madra. Then 4 more to the right. Lindon joined his spirit to the Weeping Dragon sword formation, and the pressure coming from him was enough to hold his own against the 2 dread gods. And I'm already like, ooh, what is this? And then it says, then he released his new dread god weapon. And I was like, the what? The witch, another one? Fuck. A white halo exploded over his head, stretching to titanic proportions. Dross cackled madly as he felt his capacity expand. This was really Dross's weapon. And I'm like, what? But what does it do? What does it do, though? He's left the bow behind, but he's got some of the power from the Silent King with this. It was more of an amplifier for Dross and an extra pool of power. Dross called it the psychic equivalent of a big stick. What does this do together? What does it do? What does it do exactly? I cannot wait. Genuinely, I cannot. Like, oh, Dross, what are you up to? What is this? Void black began to warp the sky between the scarlet and the gold. Then the empty ghost went to battle. And that is the end of chapter 24. You guys, I'm really glad that it's Tuesday, because that means that I get to read 2 more times this week. Otherwise, I would be very sad. So let's see. That was 23 and 24. So the next section is 3 chapters. Oh, thank God. 25, 26, 27. What a relief. Honestly. Thank you, myself. I'm so glad. Oh, man. I say that, but like, look at me. I'm at an hour. I filled an hour with only 2 chapters. I keep acting like it's doing me a favor to read more, when it's probably going to result in me having to rush a little bit. I can't win. I can't. Y'all. I really, like, there are so many things along the way here, because I think I told y'all that I, like, re-listened to this book from the beginning again. And, I still don't know, and maybe somebody will eventually chime in once that's posted, but the part where Mercy misses with the penance arrow and then I thought Zeal grabbed it, but later Dross says if you didn't drop a penance arrow where you did, you'd be dead. But on the reread, it does seem like Zeal picked up the one that Mercy dropped. So I feel like there was something there that I missed, and I really would appreciate some help on that. There's just a few little things that I'm sort of like, wait a second. And I am just really curious, like, because we've got 2 dread gods left. We've got the monarchs and Mercy going to talk to her mother. Everybody is assuming that Malice isn't going to agree to ascend. And I, based on what I've seen of her, I agree. But we've had a lot of instances of people like calculating the odds and then the least expected thing happens. And I'm kind of wondering if we're going to be surprised after all and Malice will suddenly decide to ascend. I really don't know what that would mean. Like, the thing about the ascending is I don't feel, and this is like the one flaw for me with these books. I've already talked about how convoluted the Abaddon stuff has felt from the start. To a point, I can understand why he did things the way that he did, but it was difficult. And I know that if I were to cover this with Rashawn, it would take some time for me to really slow down and talk her through it. But as for the ascending, we don't get a good idea of what that means. We know that you leave Cradle, but are there rules about we know that there's some basic rules about coming back because one of them did in the very first book and tried to take over Sacred Valley and then he was like obliterated. But why? What exactly does that look like? Does everybody who's in your family have to also agree to not come back, even if they aren't of a power level that is equivalent? Does simply ascending power you up in such a way that you become an inherent danger? Like, there's just a lot about the way it works that I would like a little bit more detail on. And I'm not really like mad that we didn't get it, but I feel like it would help me understand a bit more about what's at stake, I guess, and what potentially could be done. It seems like once you ascend, you're closing the door behind you. You just can't come back. But why is that? Like, just like, why? Why is that? And what happens to family and all of that? Sorry, Sush says, Lindon dropped the arrow that Mercy picked up. I believe it wasn't so much that Mercy missed as that the Dread God managed to dodge. Then Zeal grabs that one for his kill. Oh, okay. So, okay, I got you. The way that Dross worded it, it sounded like the thing with Lindon dropping the arrow happened later, but he's just talking about things in a general sense. And it's the same arrow that gets like dropped in the... it wasn't so much that Mercy missed as that the Dread God managed to dodge, then Zeal... Yeah, okay. Okay, I got you. Thank you, Sush. Book says miss, but I don't know. I like dodged because you don't want Mercy to have missed. Like, that sucks, right? So yeah, anyway, that is the end of chapter 24. So I'm going to go and immediately read the next 3 chapters, LOL, and I will be seeing you guys on Thursday. And until then, I hope y'all are enjoying the coverage. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.